When my mother-in-law collapsed at my dinner table, I reluctantly offered her our guest room, just until you're better. 3 months later, I discovered what she'd been hiding in that mysterious locked suitcase. Documents exposing how she and my husband had secretly sabotaged my career for years. Standing in our living room holding the evidence, I watched my husband's face drain of color as his mother whispered, "I never thought she'd find the key." Neither of them realized I'd already sent everything to their board of directors. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The dinner had started pleasantly enough. A crisp autumn evening, a carefully prepared meal, and the rare opportunity to discuss my latest business proposal with my husband, James, without interruption. After 14 years of marriage, these moments of focused conversation had become increasingly scarce, particularly when it came to my professional aspirations. I had spent 6 months developing a comprehensive plan to expand Luminous Living, my interior design firm specializing in sustainable practices and materials. What had begun as a modest home-based consultancy had gradually evolved into a respected boutique operation with 3 employees and a small but loyal client base. The proposed expansion would require significant investment, but the market research suggested the timing was ideal. The commercial sector is really where the growth potential lies, I explained, spreading the carefully prepared projections across our dining table. Corporations are increasingly concerned with their environmental footprint, and they're willing to invest in sustainable design solutions that also enhance workplace productivity. James nodded, though his attention seemed divided between my presentation and his phone, which had been buzzing persistently throughout dinner. At 42, my husband had the distinguished good looks that come from careful maintenance and considerable privilege. As CFO of Westbrook Enterprises, a property development firm founded by his family 3 generations ago, James moved through life with the easy confidence of someone who had rarely encountered significant obstacles. "It's a solid concept, Olivia," he said, finally setting his phone aside. "But the capital requirements seem steep. Perhaps we should discuss this after the Cooper project finishes. Your focus should be there, not on expansion plans." I felt a familiar flicker of frustration. The Cooper project, a residential redesign for one of James's business associates, represented exactly the kind of work I was trying to move beyond. It was lucrative, but creatively limiting, tied to conservative tastes and conventional materials. "The Cooper project is already on track," I replied, keeping my tone measured. "This expansion isn't about abandoning our current client base. It's about evolving the business to—" The doorbell's chime interrupted my response, followed immediately by the sound of a key turning in the lock. Only one person had both a tendency to ring the bell and a key to our home. "Hello? Anyone home?" The voice that floated from the entryway was melodic, carefully modulated, and instantly recognizable. Eleanor Westbrook had arrived unannounced, as was her custom. James immediately brightened. "In the dining room, Mother." I quickly gathered my business documents, sliding them into their folder as Eleanor appeared in the doorway. At 68, my mother-in-law remained striking, tall and elegant with perfectly coiffed silver hair and the kind of posture that comes from decades of deportment lessons and unwavering self-assurance. Her appearance, as always, was impeccable. A tailored navy dress, pearls at her throat, and the subtle scent of Chanel No. 5. "James, darling," she said, moving to kiss her son's cheek before turning to me with a practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Olivia, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Just dinner," I replied, returning her smile with equal insincerity. "Would you like to join us? There's plenty." "Oh, I've already eaten at the club," Eleanor said, though she settled into the chair James pulled out for her. "The Hendersons were there. They've just returned from Portugal. Victoria asked after you, James. She's divorced now, you know." Victoria Henderson had been James's girlfriend before we met, the daughter of one of Eleanor's oldest friends and, in my mother-in-law's estimation, a far more suitable match for her son than the interior designer from Oak Ridge he had ultimately married. "Mother," James said with the gentle warning tone he occasionally deployed when Eleanor's commentary veered into overtly uncomfortable territory. "What brings you by tonight?" Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "Can't a mother visit her son without an interrogation? Though, since you ask, I wanted to discuss the Westbrook Foundation Gala. The committee has a few concerns about the venue arrangements." The Westbrook Foundation, the philanthropic arm of the family business, hosted an annual fundraising gala that Eleanor had chaired for the past 30 years. Despite having no official role in the family business, she maintained considerable influence through the foundation and her extensive social connections. "I thought everything was finalized weeks ago," James said, frowning slightly. "Well, it was, until Charlotte Devereaux decided that the lighting design doesn't adequately showcase the foundation's mission," Eleanor replied, the slight emphasis conveying her opinion of Charlotte's concerns. "I was hoping you might speak with her husband. Richard always listens to you." As they launched into a detailed discussion of foundation politics, I excused myself to clear the dishes, reflecting on the familiar pattern. What had begun as a discussion about my business had seamlessly transformed into a strategy session about the Westbrook Foundation, with Eleanor effortlessly redirecting James's attention. In the kitchen, I loaded the dishwasher with more force than necessary, the ceramic plates clinking in protest. 14 years of marriage to James had also meant 14 years of navigating my relationship with Eleanor, a woman who had perfected the art of polite dismissal. Her opposition to our marriage had never been stated explicitly. Eleanor was too refined for direct confrontation. Instead, it manifested in subtle undermining, persistent reminders of my outsider status, and the remarkable ability to make my accomplishments seem quaint rather than impressive. "Your little design business is such a charming hobby," she'd commented when I won my first major contract. "It must be nice having something to occupy your time while James handles the serious financial matters." I was rinsing the serving dishes when I heard a crash from the dining room, followed by James's alarmed voice calling my name. I rushed back to find Eleanor slumped in her chair, her face ashen, a broken wine glass on the floor beside her. "She just collapsed," James said, his voice tight with worry. "She was talking about the gala, and then she just fell forward." I immediately reached for my phone to call an ambulance, but Eleanor's hand shot out with surprising strength, grasping my wrist. "No hospitals," she said, her voice weaker than I'd ever heard it. "No fuss, I just need to rest." "Mother, this isn't a time for stubbornness," James insisted. "You need medical attention." "It's just a spell," Eleanor insisted. "My doctor warned me about this. Low blood pressure. I just need to lie down." James looked at me helplessly, torn between respecting his mother's wishes and the obvious need for medical intervention. I recognized the expression. It was the same one he wore whenever caught between his mother's expectations and my needs. "Let's get her to the guest room," I suggested, pragmatic as always. "If she doesn't improve quickly, we call an ambulance regardless of her objections." Between us, we managed to help Eleanor to the guest suite on the first floor, a room that had been decorated precisely to her taste during our home renovation 3 years earlier, though she had never actually stayed overnight until now. James helped her to the bed while I fetched a glass of water and the blood pressure monitor we kept in our bathroom cabinet. Eleanor's blood pressure was indeed concerning, low enough to explain her weakness but not dangerously so. Her color had improved slightly once she was lying down. "I'm calling Dr. Abernathy," James decided, referring to the family physician, who had treated the Westbrooks for decades. "At minimum, he can advise us." While James stepped out to make the call, I adjusted the pillows behind Eleanor's head, our interaction stripped of its usual tension by the circumstances. "I'll be fine by morning," Eleanor murmured, her customary authority diminished but not absent. I just need to rest. Even so, you shouldn't be alone tonight, I replied, surprising myself with the suggestion forming in my mind. Perhaps you should stay here, just until we're sure you're stable. Eleanor regarded me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret, something between surprise and calculation. That won't be necessary. I can call my housekeeper. Margot left for her sister's wedding in Arizona yesterday, I reminded her, aware of the household staff schedules because Eleanor frequently commented on them. She won't be back until Monday. Before Eleanor could formulate another objection, James returned, looking relieved. Dr. Abernathy says it sounds like orthostatic hypotension, basically a drop in blood pressure when you change positions or get dehydrated. He wants to see you first thing tomorrow, but he doesn't think a hospital visit is necessary tonight as long as you're not alone. She can stay here, I said, the words emerging before I could reconsider. The guest room is ready, and we can keep an eye on her condition overnight. James looked at me with naked gratitude, momentarily free of the constant tension of divided loyalties. That would be perfect. Just for tonight, Mother. In the morning, we'll get you to Dr. Abernathy and then home. Eleanor's objections were perfunctory at best. The episode had clearly shaken her, though she would never admit it. Once she reluctantly agreed, James went to her house to collect her medication and overnight essentials. Left alone with my mother-in-law, I busied myself with practical tasks, finding extra pillows, setting a carafe of water on the nightstand, locating the remote control for the television mounted on the wall opposite the bed. This isn't necessary, you know, Eleanor said, watching me from her semi-reclined position. All this fussing. Probably not, I agreed, straightening the already straight bedspread. But it's what people do when they're concerned. A fleeting expression of vulnerability crossed Eleanor's face before her composed mask returned. Well, it's just for tonight. I wouldn't want to impose. Of course, I replied, recognizing the familiar script of our interactions, the polite fiction that we might someday bridge the chasm between us, followed by the careful reassertion of boundaries. Just until you're feeling better. What I couldn't have known then, as I adjusted the thermostat to Eleanor's preferred 72 degrees, was that, just for tonight, would extend into one of the most challenging and ultimately transformative periods of my life. That the woman who had spent 14 years subtly undermining my confidence and my marriage would become an inadvertent catalyst for a profound awakening. When James returned 40 minutes later, he carried an elegant leather suitcase I recognized from the few occasions we had traveled with Eleanor. What caught my attention wasn't the suitcase itself, but the small brass lock securing its closure, unusual for an overnight bag, particularly one ostensibly containing only pajamas and basics, toiletries. Mother likes her privacy, James explained when he caught me looking at the lock as he set the suitcase on the luggage rack in the guest room. Always has. I nodded, dismissing the detail as just another of Eleanor's idiosyncrasies. After, ensuring she had everything she needed for the night, including her medication and the emergency call button we normally kept in the guest bathroom, James and I retired to our bedroom upstairs. Thank you for this, James said as we prepared for bed, his arms encircling my waist from behind as I removed my earrings at the vanity. I know you and Mother haven't always connected. She's family, I replied simply, meeting his eyes in the mirror. And she needed help. James kissed the top of my head, a gesture of affection that had become less frequent in recent years, as work pressures and subtle tensions had created an almost imperceptible distance between us. This is why I love you, he murmured. Your capacity for kindness, even when it's not easy. I leaned into his embrace, wondering if he recognized how rare these moments of unguarded appreciation had become. In the early years of our marriage, James had been my staunchest defender, standing firm against his family's thinly veiled disapproval. Somewhere along the way, that steadfastness had eroded, replaced by a pattern of small compromises that individually seemed inconsequential, but collectively had shifted the balance of our relationship. As we settled into bed, I found myself thinking about the expansion plans for luminous living, now tucked away in my office. The conversation interrupted by Eleanor's arrival would need to be revisited, but I was already anticipating James's hesitation, his subtle redirection toward safer, smaller ambitions. "She'll probably be back to normal by morning," James said sleepily, misinterpreting my thoughtful silence as concern for his mother. "You know how resilient she is." "I do," I agreed, thinking of all the ways Eleanor Westbrook had demonstrated her resilience over the years, particularly in her consistent, unyielding campaign to shape our marriage according to her vision of what a Westbrook family should be. What I didn't say, as James drifted off to sleep beside me, was that I had begun to wonder about my own resilience, and whether the accommodations and compromises I had made in the name of family harmony had slowly but systematically diminished something essential in me. The thought followed me into uneasy dreams where I searched frantically for a key I knew existed but couldn't locate. The morning brought rain against the windows and the unexpected sight of Eleanor seated at our kitchen island, impeccably dressed in the clothes James had collected from her home, sipping tea as if this were her regular routine. "Good morning, Olivia," she said, her voice stronger than it had been the previous evening. "I hope you don't mind that I made tea. I didn't want to wake you or James." "Not at all," I replied, moving to the coffee maker to begin my own morning ritual. "How are you feeling?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Much improved," Eleanor said, though I noticed she remained seated rather than rising to her customary perfect posture. "Though Dr. Abernathy insisted on running some tests, so James is arranging for the car service to take us to his office at 10. I nodded, preparing my coffee in the comfortable silence that followed. Despite our differences, Eleanor and I shared an appreciation for quiet mornings, one of the few preferences we had in common. "Perhaps," Eleanor began, setting her teacup down precisely on its saucer, "I might impose on your hospitality for another day or two, just until the test results come back." The request, so unlike Eleanor's usual insistence on independence, caught me off guard. "Of course," I said automatically. "The guest room is yours for as long as you need it." A ghost of relief flickered across her features. "Thank you. It will just be for the weekend, I'm sure." As I would later discover, those words, "just for the weekend," would prove to be the first in a series of incremental extensions that would transform our carefully separated lives into an uneasy cohabitation. A weekend would become a week would become a month, and the dynamics of my marriage and my understanding of the past 14 years would shift irrevocably. But that morning, watching Eleanor sip her tea with the precise movements that characterized everything she did, I had no premonition of what was to come. No inkling that the locked suitcase sitting in our guest room contained secrets that would ultimately force me to confront truths I had spent years carefully avoiding. About my marriage, my career, and the subtle ways power can be wielded to keep someone exactly where others believe they belong. Dr. Abernathy's diagnosis proved more complex than the simple case of orthostatic hypotension we initially suspected. Eleanor's test results revealed anemia significant enough to warrant concern, along with elevated inflammatory markers that required further investigation. What had begun as a single night stay evolved into a medical monitoring situation that neither James nor I felt comfortable challenging. "Mother needs to be observed for at least a week," James explained after conferring privately with Dr. Abernathy. "He's concerned about these inflammatory markers. They could indicate anything from a chronic infection to, well, more serious conditions." The unspoken specter of serious illness hung between us. Despite my complicated relationship with Eleanor, the possibility of her facing a major health crisis stirred genuine concern. Of course she should stay, I agreed. The guest suite is comfortable, and we can ensure she takes her medications properly. Eleanor accepted this arrangement with uncharacteristic acquiescence, suggesting the medical concerns had shaken her more than she would admit. That first week established a tentative routine. Eleanor remained largely in the guest suite during the day, emerging for meals and brief periods in the living room. James hired a part-time nurse to check her vitals and administer the iron infusions Dr. Abernathy prescribed for her anemia. The following Monday brought another round of tests and an extension of Eleanor's stay. Dr. Abernathy wants to rule out several possibilities, she informed us over dinner, her tone matter-of-fact despite the subtle tremor in her hand as she reached for her water glass. It may take another week or two. Take all the time you need, James assured her, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. Olivia and I are happy to have you here. I nodded in agreement, though happy would have been an overstatement. Eleanor's presence had already begun to affect household dynamics. James was spending more time at home, ordinarily a welcome change, except his attention was focused almost exclusively on his mother. Client meetings I would typically conduct in our home office had been moved to coffee shops or our small company workspace downtown, as Eleanor's periodic needs made professional privacy impossible. Yet alongside these complications, I observed something unexpected, glimpses of vulnerability in a woman I had only ever known as formidably self-possessed. Late one evening, passing the guest room, I heard muffled sounds that could only be crying. Another night, I found her in the kitchen at 3 a.m., staring into space with an expression of such naked fear that I retreated without making my presence known, unwilling to witness what she never intended to share. These moments humanized Eleanor in ways 14 years of family gatherings had not. They didn't erase the history of subtle undermining, but they created small fissures in my perception of her as simply an adversary. By the end of the second week, Eleanor had established herself in our home with remarkable efficiency. Her medications lined the guest bathroom counter. Her preferred foods appeared in our refrigerator. The characteristic scent of her perfume lingered in our living spaces. The leather suitcase remained in the corner of the guest room, locked and untouched. When James returned from another doctor's appointment with news that Eleanor required a minor surgical procedure, nothing life-threatening, but necessitating recovery time, our weekend accommodation officially transformed into an indefinite arrangement. It's the logical solution, James insisted when I expressed mild concern about the timeline. Mother's house has all those stairs, and Margot isn't equipped for medical supervision. I understand, I assured him, and I'm not suggesting she leave. I just think we should discuss how this affects our routines, especially with my business at a critical juncture. The expansion plans for Luminous Living had been temporarily set aside during Eleanor's health crisis, but the opportunity hadn't disappeared. If anything, the commercial client I had been courting was showing increased interest, requesting detailed proposals that required my focused attention. Can't Diane handle some of this? James asked, referring to my lead designer. Just until Mother's situation stabilizes. Diane is brilliant with clients, but this is strategic planning for the company's future, I explained. It's not something I can simply delegate. James sighed, running a hand through his hair in the gesture I recognized as mounting frustration. I'm just asking for flexibility, Olivia. My mother is ill. And I'm being flexible, I countered. She's been living in our home for 2 weeks. I've rearranged my work schedule, moved client meetings off-site, and ensured she has everything she needs when you're at the office. I'm simply asking that you acknowledge this is impacting my professional obligations as well. The conversation ended without resolution, as such discussions increasingly did. James retreated to check on. Eleanor and I withdrew to my office, the subtle tension between us settling into a familiar pattern of unaddressed friction. As days stretched into weeks, Eleanor's presence became simultaneously more established and more peculiar. Though ostensibly recovering from her procedure, she began making subtle changes to our home, rearranging the living room furniture for better flow, replacing our everyday dishes with her preferred pattern, which mysteriously appeared one afternoon, and subtly critiquing my housekeeping standards when James was within earshot. "Olivia's so busy with her design clients, she hardly has time for domestic matters," she commented one evening as she pointedly wiped dust from a side table. "In my day, we managed to balance professional interests with maintaining a proper home." The comment exemplified Eleanor's particular talent, criticism packaged as apparent praise, designed to emphasize my deficiencies while maintaining plausible deniability. What was new, however, was my growing awareness of the calculation behind these remarks. Where once I might have internalized her judgment, I now recognized the strategic deployment of maternal concern to influence James's perception. More intriguing were the patterns I began to notice when Eleanor didn't realize she was being observed. The whispered phone calls that ended abruptly when I approached, the documents she hastily concealed when I entered the guest suite to deliver her medications, and most curiously, her preoccupation with the locked suitcase, which she regularly opened when alone but secured immediately if she heard footsteps approaching. One afternoon, returning home unexpectedly when a client canceled our meeting, I discovered Eleanor in my home office, methodically photographing documents from my business files with her phone. She startled visibly when I appeared in the doorway. "Oh, Olivia!" she exclaimed, hastily setting her phone down. "I was just looking for a pen to complete this insurance form." I glanced pointedly at the open file drawer and the documents spread across my desk, clearly from my confidential business records rather than medical paperwork. "The pens are in the cup on the desk," I replied evenly, "though I'm not sure how they'd help with insurance forms that are nowhere in evidence." A fleeting expression of calculation crossed Eleanor's face before she composed herself. "Well, I was actually looking for stapler as well. These hospital documents are quite disorganized." The lie was so transparent it almost seemed desperate. This wasn't Eleanor's usual sophisticated maneuvering, but something clumsier, more urgent. "Eleanor," I said carefully, "if you need something from my office, you can simply ask. These files contain confidential client information and business plans. They're not for general browsing." "Of course," she replied, gathering herself with visible effort. "I apologize for the intrusion. I should have asked." She made a dignified exit, leaving me to examine what she'd been reviewing. The file contained my expansion proposal for Luminous Living, the comprehensive business plan I'd prepared for potential investors, complete with financial projections, market analysis, and client testimonials. Nothing in those documents would be relevant to medical insurance forms or hospital paperwork. That evening, I raised the incident with James, careful to frame it as a concern rather than an accusation. "I found your mother going through my business files today," I began as we prepared dinner together, one of the few activities that still felt like genuine partnership in our increasingly strained marriage. She was photographing my expansion proposal. James paused in his chopping of vegetables, frowning slightly. "That doesn't sound like Mother. She's never shown interest in interior design business matters." "That's precisely why it struck me as odd," I agreed, keeping my tone neutral. When I asked her about it, she claimed she was looking for a pen for insurance forms, but there were no medical documents anywhere in the room. "She's been under tremendous stress with these health concerns," James suggested, resuming his chopping with more force than necessary. "She's probably just disoriented occasionally. Dr. Abernathy mentioned that her medications might cause some confusion." This didn't seem like confusion, James. She was methodically photographing specific documents about Luminous Living's financial projections. James set down his knife, turning to face me directly. What exactly are you suggesting, Olivia? That my mother, who is recovering from surgery and undergoing tests for potentially serious conditions, is what? Conducting corporate espionage in your home office? Put that way, my concerns did sound paranoid, yet the image of Eleanor's calculated focus as she documented my business plans wouldn't fade. I'm not suggesting anything nefarious, I said carefully. I'm simply telling you what I observed and asking that we consider setting some boundaries around my workspace. It contains confidential client information. Fine, James replied tersely. I'll speak with her about respecting your office space. But please try to be understanding. She's not herself right now. The conversation ended there, but the incident catalyzed a new awareness. I began paying closer attention to patterns I might otherwise have dismissed, like how my business calls were frequently interrupted when Eleanor was within earshot, or how potential clients sometimes referenced concerns about my company's stability that seemed to originate from sources close to the Westbrook family. Most puzzling was the change in James himself. As Eleanor's stay extended into its second month, he became increasingly preoccupied with the family business, scheduling evening calls with board members and spending weekends reviewing documents. He deliberately kept separate from our usual household paperwork. When I inquired about these activities, his responses were vague, citing strategic realignments and governance matters without specific details. The mysterious locked suitcase remained a constant presence in the guest room, its contents unknown but clearly precious enough to warrant security. During my weekly cleaning of the suite, a courtesy Eleanor accepted with gracious condescension, I noticed she always ensured the suitcase was moved to wherever she could maintain direct sight of it, never leaving it unattended in my presence. The turning point came unexpectedly during the third month of Eleanor's residency. Dr. Abernathy had finally diagnosed her with an autoimmune condition, serious but manageable with the right medication regimen. The immediate health crisis had passed, yet there was no discussion of Eleanor returning to her own home. The medication side effects can be quite severe initially, she explained when I delicately raised the subject of her eventual departure. Dr. Abernathy thinks it's best if I remain where someone can monitor any adverse reactions. That same evening, a significant potential client, the commercial developer whose interest had prompted my expansion proposal, called to inform me they would not be proceeding with Luminous Living for their new sustainable office complex. We've decided to go with a more established firm, the project director explained, his discomfort evident even over the phone. One with a more stable foundation. May I ask what prompted this decision? I inquired, struggling to maintain professional composure despite the devastating blow to my expansion plans. Our proposal addressed all the sustainability requirements, and our portfolio demonstrates our capacity to execute at this scale. A telling pause followed. Ms. Parker, I'll be frank. We received some concerning information about your company's financial structure and your personal involvement in previous project complications. While your design concepts are impressive, we can't risk the complications that might arise from certain business irregularities. Business irregularities? I repeated, genuinely baffled. Luminous Living has an impeccable record with all previous clients. I'm not aware of any irregularities. The information came from a highly credible source, he replied, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Someone with intimate knowledge of your business practices and history. I'm not at liberty to discuss details, but we've made our decision. After the call ended, I sat in my office, stunned and increasingly angry. The only complications in my professional history had been a disputed invoice with a client 3 years earlier, a dispute that was ultimately resolved in my favor when the client admitted to changing project specifications without proper documentation. It had been a minor issue, hardly the kind of irregularity that would concern a major developer. More telling was the phrase, intimate knowledge of your business practices. Few people had such knowledge, and even fewer would have both the motivation, and the credibility to sabotage a major contract. I was contemplating this troubling development when I heard a crash from the guest suite, followed by Eleanor's distressed call for help. I rushed to find her on the floor beside the bed, the contents of her suitcase scattered around her. I was trying to reach my medication and lost my balance, she explained as I helped her onto the bed. Could you gather my things, please? I feel quite dizzy. The spilled contents of the mysterious suitcase were now fully visible. Not the personal items or valuables I had imagined, but documents. Dozens of folders, USB drives, and what appeared to be financial records. As I began collecting them, a familiar logo caught my eye. Luminous Living's distinctive emblem on papers that were clearly not marketing materials I had created. I can manage those, Eleanor said sharply, reaching for the documents with sudden urgency. Just hand me the medication on the nightstand. I passed her the prescription bottle, but my attention remained fixed on the papers now partially visible. They appeared to be financial analyses of my company, communications with my clients, and most disturbingly, what looked like correspondence between James and several business associates discussing Luminous Living's containment. What is all this? I asked, holding up a folder labeled LL Intervention Strategy. Eleanor's face transformed, the mask of fragile vulnerability replaced by something harder and more calculated. Those are private business matters. I'd appreciate you respecting my privacy. These documents concern my company, I replied, no longer bothering to conceal my suspicion. Why do you have detailed analyses of Luminous Living's finances in your suitcase? Before she could answer, James appeared in the doorway, summoned by the commotion. He froze at the sight of the scattered documents, his expression shifting rapidly from concern to alarm. Mother, are you all right? He asked, though his eyes remained fixed on the papers in my hands. Olivia is going through my private papers, Eleanor said, her voice carrying the practiced note of wounded dignity I had heard so many times before. I had a small fall, and now she's taking advantage of the situation. That's not what happened, I countered, holding up the folder. Eleanor's suitcase spilled when she fell. These are documents about my company, financial analyses, client communications I never authorized, and what appears to be a strategy for containing Luminous Living's growth. I'd like to know why these exist and why your mother has them. James paled visibly, glancing between his mother and me with an expression I had never seen before. Guilt mingled with resignation. Perhaps we should discuss this later, he suggested, moving to help Eleanor back into bed. Mother needs to rest, and this is hardly the time for— No, I interrupted, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. This is exactly the time. For 3 months, I've accommodated Eleanor's presence in our home despite the impact on my business. I've rescheduled client meetings, limited my workspace, and adjusted my professional routine. And now I discover that while I've been making these accommodations, someone has been actively undermining my company's reputation with potential clients. Eleanor's expression hardened, the pretense of frailty falling away entirely. James, I think you should explain the situation to your wife. It's gone on quite long enough. The way she said, your wife, as if the title were provisional rather than permanent, sent a chill through me. I turned to James, suddenly certain that whatever came next would fundamentally alter our marriage. Explain what, exactly? I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil I felt. James sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair in that familiar gesture of discomfort. The Westbrook family has certain expectations for its members. Business interests that take priority over personal projects. Personal projects? I repeated incredulously. Luminous Living is not a hobby, James. It's a legitimate business I've built over 8 years of dedicated work. A business that was never meant to expand beyond a certain point, Eleanor interjected, her voice carrying the absolute certainty of someone accustomed to defining others' limitations. The Westbrook name carries weight in this community. We can't have it associated with risky ventures or failures. Luminous Living has never failed, I countered, anger rising. In fact, it's been consistently profitable despite limited resources and support. Because we've ensured it remained within appropriate parameters, Eleanor replied, exchanging a glance with James that confirmed my growing suspicion. Small projects, residential clients, contained visibility. I turned to James, the revelation, crystallizing with devastating clarity. You've been restricting my business, deliberately. He had the grace to look ashamed, though not enough to deny it. Not restricting, guiding, protecting, ensuring it remained manageable alongside your responsibilities to the Westbrook family. My responsibilities? The question emerged as barely more than a whisper. And what exactly are those, James? To remain decoratively occupied while never achieving anything significant enough to overshadow the almighty Westbrook enterprises? You're being dramatic, Eleanor said dismissively. James has simply been safeguarding family interests while allowing you your creative outlet. It's a generous arrangement. Generous? I echoed, disbelief giving way to a cold, clarifying anger. You've been systematically sabotaging my professional growth for years, and you call that generous? I turned my attention back to the scattered documents, now seeing them for what they truly were. Evidence of a long-term campaign to keep Luminous Living, to keep me, contained and controlled. The realization was both devastating and strangely liberating, as if a puzzle I had been unconsciously assembling for years had finally revealed its complete picture. How long? I asked James, meeting his gaze directly. How long have you been interfering with my business? The question hung between us, heavy with 14 years of implications. James glanced at his mother, seeking guidance even in this moment of reckoning, and I realized with sudden clarity that I already knew the answer. It had never been a partnership. Not really. Not when one partner's success was carefully managed, to ensure it never disrupted the established order. Since the beginning, I answered for him, the truth settling into my bones with surprising weight. Since I first mentioned expanding beyond residential projects. James didn't deny it. His silence was confirmation enough. I gathered several key documents from the scattered papers, including the folder labeled LL Intervention Strategy, and what appeared to be communications with the commercial client who had just rejected my proposal. I'm taking these, I said, my voice steadier than I would have thought possible. They concern my business and appear to document deliberate interference with my client relationships. The rest of your surveillance materials can stay in the suitcase where they belong. Those are private Westbrook family documents, Eleanor protested, abandoning all pretense of illness as she straightened against the headboard. You have no right to them. Actually, I have every right to documentation of actions taken against my company, I replied, a new confidence emerging from the ashes of betrayal. And I believe several regulatory bodies would find them quite interesting as well. The threat wasn't empty. Even my cursory glance at the documents suggested potential business interference that crossed ethical and possibly legal boundaries. You wouldn't dare, Eleanor said, though the first flicker of uncertainty crossed her immaculate features. Consider what this would do to the Westbrook name, to James's position. I'm more concerned with what it's already done to my business, I replied. And to me. I turned to leave, the documents secured firmly under my arm, when James finally found his voice. Olivia, wait, he pleaded, his tone carrying genuine distress. We need to discuss this, to explain. It's not what you think. I'm fairly certain it's exactly what I think, I replied, pausing at the doorway. A systematic campaign to ensure Luminous Living never grew beyond what you and your mother deemed appropriate for a Westbrook wife. The question isn't what happened, James. It's what happens next. With that, I left the guest suite, the weight of 14 years of subtle manipulation finally giving way to the unexpected lightness of clarity. The documents in my hands represented both betrayal and opportunity, evidence of the constraints that had been invisibly placed around my ambitions, but also the key to breaking free of them once and for all. In our bedroom, I carefully photographed each document, creating digital copies before securing the originals in my personal safe. Whatever came next, confrontation, negotiation, or separation, I would face it with full knowledge of what I was up against and what I was fighting for. Not just a business, though Luminous Living represented years of dedicated work, but something more fundamental, the right to define my own success, to pursue excellence without artificial limitations, and to build a life where partnership meant mutual support rather than strategic containment. As I completed this task, I caught sight of my reflection in the bedroom mirror, a woman I recognized but hadn't truly seen in years. Behind the careful accommodations and compromises lay someone stronger and more determined than Eleanor Westbrook had accounted for in her meticulous calculations. "Just for the weekend," I murmured, recalling Eleanor's initial promise with grim amusement. The weekend had stretched into 3 months, but it had given me something invaluable, the truth that would set me free. Morning arrived with startling clarity. I had spent most of the night reviewing the documents I'd retrieved from Eleanor's suitcase, each page revealing more of the elaborate scheme to contain my professional ambitions. The methodical nature of their interference was breathtaking, not just reactive interventions when opportunities arose, but a proactive strategy designed to keep Luminous Living permanently in a supporting role to the Westbrook empire. I was in the kitchen preparing coffee when James appeared, his usually impeccable appearance showing signs of a similarly sleepless night. He hesitated in the doorway, uncertainty replacing his typical confidence. "We need to talk," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "Yes, we do," I agreed, pouring coffee into 2 mugs with deliberate calm. "But first, I'd like to know if Eleanor is joining us, or if she's decided to finally return to her own home." "She's still resting," James replied, accepting the coffee I offered. "Last night was difficult for her." "How unfortunate," I responded, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "Having your systematic sabotage of your daughter-in-law's career exposed must be quite stressful." James winced. "Olivia, it wasn't sabotage. We were trying to protect—" "If you're about to say you were protecting me, I suggest you reconsider," I interrupted. "The documents I found include correspondence with the Henderson Group specifically discouraging them from working with Luminous Living by suggesting financial instability that doesn't exist. They show you and your mother discussing how to redirect my attention away from commercial clients toward residential projects that would keep me appropriately occupied. There are spreadsheets tracking potential growth scenarios for my company with contingency plans for each one." I set my coffee down, meeting his gaze directly. "This wasn't protection, James. This was control." He sank into a kitchen chair, shoulders slumping in a posture so unlike his usual bearing that I might have felt sympathy under different circumstances. "You have to understand the Westbrook family context," he began, the familiar refrain that had justified countless compromises over the years. "The business has been passed down through generations with specific expectations for family members. When we married, Mother was concerned that your career ambitions might eventually conflict with your role as a Westbrook wife." "And what exactly is that role?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Supportive," he replied automatically. "Engaged in appropriate civic and social activities. Present for key family and business functions. Available to manage household matters when business demands my attention. Essentially decorative," I translated. "With just enough occupation to feel fulfilled but never enough success to develop genuine independence." James frowned. "That's not fair. Mother never objected to your design work. She simply felt it should remain." complementary to our primary family interests. Complementary, I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. So when the Cooper project came up, a major residential redesign for one of your business associates, you and Eleanor encouraged it. But when I began developing relationships with commercial clients who had no connection to Westbrook Enterprises, suddenly there were obstacles. I pulled out one of the documents I'd discovered, a memo from James to Eleanor dated nearly 2 years earlier. Here you specifically mention diverting my attention from the Blackwell commercial proposal by suggesting it would compromise family time and create unnecessary stress. You then outline a strategy to have Richard Sullivan, another Westbrook board member, hire me for his home renovation as a more suitable alternative. James had the decency to look ashamed. I was trying to find a middle path, Olivia, one that would satisfy both your creative needs and the family expectations. Without ever consulting me about these family expectations, I noted. Did it ever occur to you that I might have had different ambitions for my life and career than what the Westbrook dynasty prescribed? Of course it did, he replied, a flash of frustration breaking through his contrition. But marriage requires compromise. The Westbrook name opens doors, provides security, offers advantages most people never experience. Those benefits come with certain responsibilities. Responsibilities I never agreed to because they were never honestly presented to me, I countered. You never said, Olivia, if you marry me, you'll need to limit your professional ambitions to what my mother deems appropriate. That wasn't part of our vows. Perhaps I should have been more explicit, James conceded, rubbing his temples. But I genuinely believed we could find a balance that worked for everyone. A balance where I remained unaware that my own husband was actively undermining my business opportunities. I shook my head in disbelief. That's not balance, James. That's manipulation. A heavy silence fell between us. 14 years of unspoken expectations and silent compromises finally laid bare. In that moment, I realized how much of myself I had gradually surrendered. Not in dramatic confrontations, but in small concessions that seemed individually reasonable, but collectively amounted to a fundamental reshaping of my ambitions. What do you want? James finally asked, his voice quiet. It was a profound question, one that I had stopped asking myself years ago as I unconsciously adjusted my desires to fit within the confines of what seemed possible in a Westbrook marriage. I want autonomy, I replied after careful consideration. The freedom to grow luminous living according to my vision, not Eleanor's prescribed limitations. I want transparency moving forward, no more hidden interventions or manipulated circumstances. And I want accountability for the opportunities that were deliberately sabotaged. James looked alarmed at this last point. Accountability how exactly? The Henderson Group contract would have been transformative for my business, I said. Your interference cost me that opportunity, and potentially others I don't even know about yet. That represents significant financial damage to luminous living. You're talking as if this is some kind of legal negotiation, James protested. Perhaps it should be, I replied evenly. The documents I found would make a compelling case for tortious interference with business relationships, not to mention the ethical violations involved in a Westbrook Enterprises officer deliberately undermining an independent business. The threat wasn't empty. Though I had no desire for a public legal battle, the evidence I'd gathered represented a significant leverage point, one I was finally prepared to use. You wouldn't, James said, but his expression revealed uncertainty. Think about what this would do to the family, to the company's reputation. I've spent 14 years thinking about what's best for the Westbrook family, I replied. Perhaps it's time I prioritized what's best for Olivia Parker and luminous living. Our conversation was interrupted by Eleanor's appearance in the doorway, her usual immaculate presentation restored after the previous night's disarray. She had evidently overheard enough to understand the direction of our discussion. Legal threats seem rather extreme, Olivia, she remarked, moving to the coffee maker with deliberate poise, especially between family members. Family members don't typically sabotage each other's careers, I countered. Yet here we are. Eleanor poured herself coffee, her movements precise and controlled. What James and I did was simply protect Westbrook interests while allowing you appropriate creative outlet. Your design work has been a lovely hobby. A hobby that generates six-figure annual revenue and supports 3 employees, I corrected her. A hobby that would have expanded into a significant commercial design firm if not for your systematic interference. Commercial expansion carries substantial risk, Eleanor replied dismissively. The Westbrook name cannot be associated with business failures. Luminous Living has never failed, I stated firmly. Despite your best efforts to limit its growth. Eleanor set her coffee cup down with careful precision. What exactly are you hoping to accomplish with these accusations, Olivia? Do you imagine James will suddenly abandon his family obligations to support your unrestricted ambitions? That the Westbrook board would tolerate such divided loyalties? The question revealed more than Eleanor likely intended. The fundamental assumption that James's loyalty to me and to his family business were inherently in conflict, that my success would necessarily undermine his position rather than complement it. I'm not asking James to abandon anything, I clarified. I'm asking for the freedom to pursue my own professional path without covert interference, and for acknowledgement of the damage already done. Eleanor's expression hardened. If you pursue this adversarial approach, you should consider the broader implications. The Westbrook connections that have facilitated many of your residential projects could easily disappear. The social circles that generate your client referrals might become less welcoming. Your position would be significantly altered. The threat was thinly veiled but unmistakable. Eleanor was making it clear that my identity as James's wife, and all the associated benefits, was conditional upon my compliance with Westbrook expectations. I felt an unexpected calm settle over me as the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. For 14 years, I had operated under the illusion that I could balance being Olivia Parker, independent designer, and Olivia Westbrook, dutiful wife. Now I understood that in Eleanor's vision, and perhaps in James's as well, these identities were never meant to coexist as equals. One was always intended to subsume the other. I think, I said carefully, that my position changed the moment I discovered those documents in your suitcase, Eleanor. The question now is whether there's a path forward that respects my autonomy while preserving what matters in my marriage to James. I turned to my husband, who had been watching our exchange with visible discomfort. That depends largely on you, James. Are you willing to stop interfering with Luminous Living? To support my commercial expansion efforts as genuinely as I've supported your career? To stand with me as a true partner, rather than as Eleanor's proxy? The silence that followed felt laden with 14 years of unacknowledged compromise. James glanced between his mother and me, and I could see the internal struggle playing across his features. Eleanor had been the dominant influence in his life since childhood, shaping his understanding of family obligation and appropriate ambition. Opposing her vision meant challenging not just her authority, but his own deeply ingrained beliefs about his role as a Westbrook heir. I need you both to understand something, he finally said, his voice steadier than I had expected. I love my family and respect our legacy, but I also love my wife and believe in her talents. Eleanor made a small, dismissive sound. No one is questioning her talent for residential design, James. We're simply discussing appropriate scope and scale. No, Mother, James replied with unexpected firmness. You're discussing control, who has it and who doesn't. I've allowed this dynamic to continue because it seemed easier than confronting the fundamental tension between your expectations and Olivia's ambitions. That was my failure. He turned to me, his expression more open than it had been in years. "I owe you an apology, Olivia. Not just for the specific interventions, but for never having the courage to challenge the underlying assumptions about what your career should be." The acknowledgement was more than I had expected, though less than complete vindication. "Apologies matter," I said carefully. "But so does action. What happens next?" James straightened his shoulders, a gesture I recognized from board meetings and difficult business negotiations. "First, we establish clear boundaries. Mother will return to her home today. Her health has stabilized sufficiently for her to resume normal activities with appropriate medical support." Eleanor's eyes widened in surprise. "James, be reasonable." "My recovery has progressed well," he interrupted firmly. "Dr. Abernathy confirmed yesterday that your condition is responding to treatment and that normal activities can be gradually resumed. Margot can provide any necessary assistance, and I'll check on you regularly." He turned back to me. "Second, I will personally contact the Henderson Group to correct any misrepresentations about Luminous Living's stability or capabilities. If the opportunity is truly lost, I'll connect you with 3 other commercial developers in my network who might benefit from your sustainable design approach." Eleanor set her coffee cup down with enough force to slosh liquid onto the pristine countertop. "This is absurd, James. You're undermining years of careful family strategy because your wife is having a tantrum about business boundaries she should have understood from the beginning." "No, Mother," James replied, his tone gentle but unyielding. "I'm finally acknowledging that those boundaries were never openly discussed or mutually agreed upon. They were imposed without Olivia's knowledge or consent." He turned to me again. "I can't promise to undo 14 years of entangled expectations overnight, but I can commit to transparency moving forward. No more interventions, no more redirections. Your business grows or falters on its own merits, not according to Westbrook prescriptions." The offer represented more change than I had dared hope, for in the immediate aftermath of discovering Eleanor's documents, yet it also revealed how far we still had to go. That James saw his commitment to non-interference as a significant concession rather than the basic respect any partnership should include. "It's a start," I acknowledged, "but there's something even more fundamental that needs to change." "What's that?" James asked. Our relationship with the idea of success," I explained. "For 14 years, we've operated under the assumption that my success and the Westbrook legacy were inherently in conflict. That for one to thrive, the other must be contained. I need to know that you genuinely believe both can flourish simultaneously, that my ambitions don't threaten your family identity, but enhance it." Eleanor made a sound of exasperation. "This philosophical negotiation is all very touching, but it ignores practical realities. The Westbrook name carries significant weight in business circles. Attaching it to untested ventures creates very real risks." "All ventures are untested until they succeed," I countered, "including Westbrook. Enterprises in its earliest days. Someone had to believe in its potential before it became the institution it is now." I turned back to James. "I don't need the Westbrook name to succeed. What I need is for my husband to stop seeing my ambitions as a threat to his family legacy and start seeing them as part of our shared future. Different from what Eleanor envisioned, perhaps, but no less valid." James was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful in a way I hadn't seen since the early years of our marriage, before the subtle weight of Westbrook expectations had narrowed his perspective. "You're right," he said finally. "I've been operating from a scarcity mindset, as if your success would somehow diminish the Westbrook legacy rather than expand it in new directions. That stops today." Eleanor rose abruptly. "I see there's no reasoning with either of you this morning. When you've both calmed down and considered the practical implications of this rebellion, we can resume a more rational discussion." "There's nothing irrational about expecting professional autonomy, Eleanor," I replied evenly. Or about a husband supporting his wife's ambitions as she has supported his. We'll speak later, Mother, James said firmly. In the meantime, I'll help you pack your things. The car service can take you home after lunch. Eleanor's carefully composed expression flickered with momentary shock at this unexpected assertion of independence from her son. Without another word, she turned and left the kitchen, her rigid posture communicating her displeasure more effectively than any verbal response. When we were alone again, James reached across the table to take my hand. I know this doesn't instantly repair the damage done or rebuild the trust broken, but I hope it's a beginning. I looked at our joined hands, a simple gesture that now carried complicated implications. The morning's revelations had forever altered my understanding of our marriage. The subtle manipulations, the unspoken limitations, the carefully managed aspirations. Yet beneath that painful clarity lay an unexpected possibility. The chance to rebuild on a foundation of genuine partnership rather than prescribed roles. It's a beginning, I agreed carefully. But the path forward depends on actions, not just intentions. I need to see tangible evidence that you're committed to supporting Luminous Living's growth without Eleanor's interference. You will, James promised. Starting with the Henderson Group. I'll call Marcus Henderson personally this morning to correct any misrepresentations about your company. I nodded, allowing a cautious optimism to emerge alongside the lingering hurt. And I need access to any other documents detailing past interference with my business opportunities. I need to understand exactly what I've been up against. James hesitated briefly before nodding. I'll provide everything. Full transparency. As he left to help Eleanor pack, I remained at the kitchen table, contemplating the extraordinary turn of events that 3 months of an uninvited houseguest had precipitated. The locked suitcase that had piqued my curiosity had ultimately contained not just documents but liberation. Painful in its revelations, but potentially transformative in its consequences. For 14 years, I had unconsciously accommodated myself to boundaries I never knew existed, adjusting my ambitions to fit within parameters I hadn't chosen. Now those invisible constraints had been exposed, creating both the discomfort of disillusionment and the exhilaration of newfound possibility. Later that afternoon, I stood in the doorway watching as the car service drove Eleanor back to her own home. The guest room, finally vacated after 3 months of occupation, seemed larger somehow, a space of potential rather than constraint. The mysterious suitcase was gone, but its contents had permanently altered the landscape of my marriage and my understanding of what was possible for Luminous Living. As I turned back toward my home office, I felt a sense of determination I hadn't experienced in years. Eleanor's unintended 3-month stay had revealed the elaborate machinery of limitation that had been operating in the background of my life. But in exposing those mechanisms, she had also revealed their fundamental weakness. They functioned only as long as they remained invisible, unquestioned, and unchallenged. Now, with that machinery laid bare, I could finally begin dismantling it, not with resentment or retribution, but with the clear-eyed purpose of a woman reclaiming her right to define success on her own terms. The weeks following Eleanor's departure unfolded with revelatory momentum. True to his word, James provided access to the complete archive of what I now thought of as the containment files, years of correspondence, strategies, and interventions designed to keep Luminous Living firmly within prescribed boundaries. Reading through them was both painful and empowering, like examining the blueprint of an invisible cage I had unwittingly inhabited. Most illuminating were the early documents from our first year of marriage, when I had begun transitioning from freelance design work to establishing Luminous Living as a formal business entity. What I had experienced as encouraging guidance from James and practical advice from Eleanor had actually been a carefully orchestrated campaign to direct my professional development along acceptable channels. Residential focus maintains appropriate scale while providing creative satisfaction, Eleanor had written to James just 3 months after our wedding. Commercial ambitions would create schedule conflicts with Westbrook social obligations and potential competitive tensions with board members' interests. The methodical nature of their interference was breathtaking. When I expressed interest in sustainable commercial design during our second year of marriage, James had dutifully encouraged me toward high-end residential projects instead, following Eleanor's detailed guidance on redirecting my ambitions without triggering my awareness or resistance. Position commercial projects as unnecessarily stressful and residential work as more personally fulfilling, she had advised. Emphasize the prestige of designing for prominent families rather than the anonymous nature of corporate spaces. I remembered those conversations vividly, how James had seemed so supportive of my talent while subtly steering me toward options that now, with painful clarity, I recognized as deliberately limiting. The realization that many of our most intimate discussions about my career had been essentially scripted by Eleanor produced a particular kind of heartbreak, one that involved not just betrayal, but the unsettling recognition that parts of my own identity had been shaped by external manipulation. Yet alongside this disillusionment grew a counterbalancing resolve. Each revealed strategy strengthened my determination to reclaim control of my professional narrative. Each exposed manipulation clarified the path forward. James, to his credit, honored his commitment to transparency, answering my questions with unflinching honesty even when the truth reflected poorly on him. Our conversations were difficult but necessary, excavating years of unacknowledged tensions and resetting fundamental expectations. I genuinely believed I was protecting you, he admitted during one particularly raw discussion. The commercial design world can be brutal. Project cancellations, payment disputes, reputation challenges. I told myself I was sparing you that stress while supporting your creativity in a more controlled environment. That wasn't your decision to make, I pointed out, my voice steady despite the emotion behind the words. I didn't need protection from normal business challenges. I needed a partner who believed in my capacity to overcome them. I know that now, James acknowledged. I've been thinking a lot about why I so readily accepted Mother's framework. Part of it was family conditioning. The Westbrook way has always been presented as inherently correct, beyond questioning. But part of it was my own insecurity. Insecurity? I echoed, surprised by this admission from a man whose confidence had always seemed unshakable. James nodded, his expression unusually vulnerable. If you had built something truly successful independently, something that had nothing to do with the Westbrook name or connections, what would you need me for? Mother played on that fear, but it was already there. The admission shifted something in my understanding of our marriage. I had always perceived James as the secure one, confidently, navigating his predetermined path while I sought to establish my professional identity. The revelation that he had harbored his own profound insecurities about our relationship reframed the power dynamics I had long accepted as fixed. My ambition was never about diminishing our partnership, I said after a thoughtful pause. Success doesn't have to be a zero-sum game where one person's achievement threatens the other's value. These conversations, painful as they were, gradually established a new foundation for our relationship, one built on mutual recognition rather than prescribed roles. For perhaps the first time in our marriage, we were seeing each other clearly, acknowledging both strengths and vulnerabilities without the distorting lens of Westbrook expectations. Meanwhile, my professional liberation proceeded with startling speed. James's call to Marcus Henderson had indeed corrected misrepresentations about luminous living, though the damage to that particular opportunity proved irreversible. However, his promised introductions to other commercial developers yielded unexpected fruit. Valerie Chen, founder of Ecosphere Developments and a rising force in sustainable commercial properties, reached out just days after James contacted her about my work. Unlike the traditional developers in the Westbrook network, Valerie had built her company independently, focusing exclusively on environmentally conscious projects that aligned perfectly with Luminous Living's design philosophy. "Your portfolio is impressive," she remarked during our initial meeting in her minimalist downtown office, "especially considering the artificial constraints you've been working under." I raised an eyebrow, surprised by her candor. "James mentioned the circumstances?" "He did," Valerie confirmed with a wry smile. "Partly as context for your work, partly as a warning that his mother might attempt to interfere with any potential collaboration between us." "And that didn't concern you?" Valerie laughed, a genuine sound that immediately put me at ease. "Eleanor Westbrook tried to block my first major development 4 years ago when she discovered I'd declined her son Robert as an investor. She's formidable, but not omnipotent." The casual reference to having successfully navigated Eleanor's opposition was refreshing, a reminder that outside the carefully managed Westbrook sphere of influence, other paths to success existed, ones that didn't require compliance with traditional power structures. "I'm developing a 6-building complex in the Harbor District," Valerie continued. "Each building will house organizations committed to environmental innovation, renewable energy startups, sustainable fashion brands, conservation nonprofits. The interior spaces need to reflect that mission while providing functional, inspiring workplaces." She slid a tablet across the desk, displaying the architectural plans for an ambitious development that would transform a formerly industrial area into a hub for environmentally focused enterprises. "This would be the largest project Luminous Living has undertaken," I acknowledged, studying the plans with growing excitement. "We'd need to expand our team to handle the scope." "That's what growth looks like," Valerie replied matter-of-factly. "I started Ecosphere with 3 employees in a converted warehouse space. We now have offices in 4 cities. Scaling isn't just about managing more work. It's about building systems that maintain your vision while accommodating expansion." Her confidence in my capability to grow Luminous Living, expressed without qualification or concern, stood in stark contrast to the careful limitations I had encountered for years. Here was a successful woman who saw my ambition not as something to be contained, but as a natural expression of professional evolution. "I'd like to submit a formal proposal," I said, already mentally assembling the team enhancements we would need. "Give me 2 weeks to develop a comprehensive approach for the complex." "You have 10 days," Valerie replied with a challenging smile. "We're moving quickly on this project, but I suspect you work well under pressure when it's the right kind of pressure." The distinction resonated deeply. The difference between the constricting pressure of artificial limitations and the expansive pressure of meaningful opportunity. For the first time in years, I felt the exhilarating tension of reaching toward my full professional capacity rather than carefully containing it. The proposal development became a transformative process for Luminous Living. I hired 2 additional designers with commercial experience, brought on a project manager with expertise in large-scale implementations, and restructured our workflow to accommodate the expanded team. What had been a boutique residential design firm began its evolution into a comprehensive, sustainable design practice capable of handling significant commercial projects. James observed these changes with a mixture of admiration and adjustment. Having committed to supporting my unrestrained professional growth, he now experienced firsthand what that actually meant. Later dinners, weekend work sessions, and a wife whose focus had expanded beyond the careful balance of career and Westbrook obligations that had previously defined our marriage. "You're different," he remarked one evening, finding me at the dining table surrounded by material samples and sustainability specifications. "Energized in a way I haven't seen in years." "This is who I've always been," I corrected him gently. "You're just seeing it without the filter of managed expectations for the first time." He nodded thoughtfully, accepting the mild rebuke with grace. "It suits you," this unleashed version. I'm sorry it took so long to emerge. That James could acknowledge the damage of past constraints without defensiveness represented its own kind of growth, a willingness to see beyond the Westbrook paradigm that had shaped his understanding of appropriate ambition and partnership. 2 days before my proposal deadline, Eleanor made her inevitable appearance, arriving unannounced at our door with the determined expression of someone prepared for confrontation. "James isn't home," I informed her, not stepping aside to invite her in. "He's in meetings until evening." "I'm here to speak with you, Olivia," she replied, her perfect posture communicating authority despite my failure to welcome her inside. "About this reckless expansion you're pursuing." "My company's growth strategy isn't up for discussion," I said firmly, particularly not with someone who actively worked to undermine its potential for years. Eleanor's carefully composed expression flickered with irritation. "Being dramatic doesn't change practical realities. The Ecosphere project is significantly beyond your experience level. When it inevitably encounters problems, the resulting failure will reflect poorly on the Westbrook name." "I'm not a Westbrook," I reminded her, finding unexpected power in the simple statement. "I'm Olivia Parker, founder and CEO of Luminous Living. My professional reputation stands on its own merits." "Don't be naive," Eleanor scoffed. "Your connection to the Westbrook family has opened doors throughout your career. Those same doors can close just as easily." The threat was familiar, but had lost its power. The documents from Eleanor's suitcase had revealed not just the mechanisms of control, but their fundamental limitations. They functioned only through my unconscious cooperation, my tacit acceptance of boundaries I hadn't chosen to establish. "You should know," I said calmly, "that I've secured a meeting with the Westbrook Foundation Board next week to present a full accounting of your interference with Luminous Living's business opportunities. The evidence suggests not just ethical breaches but potential legal liability for tortious interference." Eleanor paled slightly, though her composure remained intact. "The board won't move against me. I've chaired the foundation for 30 years. "Perhaps not," I acknowledged. "But they'll certainly be interested in understanding how the foundation's reputation might be affected if these documents became public. Particularly the ones where you explicitly leveraged Westbrook connections to discourage potential clients from working with a woman-owned sustainable design firm." The calculation was visible in Eleanor's expression, weighing the potential damage to her standing against the satisfaction of maintaining control. For perhaps the first time in our 14-year relationship, I recognized that her power derived largely from the perception of its inevitability, the assumption that opposition was futile. "What do you want, Olivia?" she asked finally, her tone shifting from confrontational to pragmatic. "I want exactly what I've already claimed: professional autonomy and accountability for past interference," I replied. "In practical terms, that means no further contact with my clients or potential partners, no undermining comments in social settings, and a formal acknowledgement to the Westbrook board that your previous representations about Luminous Living's stability were unfounded." Eleanor's lips thinned with displeasure. "You're overreaching. A simple agreement to maintain distance moving forward would be sufficient." "Perhaps if discovered earlier," I countered. "But 14 years of systematic sabotage requires more substantial redress." The negotiation continued on my doorstep, neither of us willing to cede territorial advantage by moving to more comfortable surroundings. By the time we reached a reluctant accord, Eleanor had agreed to my terms with one significant addition of her own: that any future projects involving Westbrook properties or direct family interests would include her in initial consultations to ensure appropriate alignment with family aesthetics. It was a small concession that allowed her to maintain a perception of authority while acknowledging the fundamental shift in our power dynamic. More importantly, it established clear boundaries that protected my broader professional autonomy while creating specific, limited contexts where collaboration was expected. As Eleanor departed, visibly displeased but pragmatically accepting of the new reality, I reflected on how profoundly 3 months of an unwanted house guest had transformed my understanding of both personal and professional power. The locked suitcase that had initially seemed a minor curiosity had contained not just documents but a key to my own liberation, from unconscious compliance, from artificial limitations, from the subtle erosion of ambition through persistent redirection. The ecosphere proposal, submitted 2 days later, represented more than a bid for a significant commercial project. It embodied a reclamation of professional purpose, design work that aligned with my environmental values, showcased my team's capabilities, and established Luminous Living as a significant presence in sustainable commercial spaces. When Valerie Chen called to confirm we had secured the contract, the victory felt simultaneously unexpected and inevitable, the natural outcome of talent finally unleashed from artificial constraints. Your proposal demonstrated a comprehensive understanding of our mission, Valerie explained. The integration of sustainable materials with productivity-enhancing designs was precisely what we needed. Thank you for the opportunity, I replied, genuine gratitude mingling with hard-won confidence. My team is ready to begin immediately. There is one issue we should address, Valerie added, her tone shifting slightly. I received a call from Eleanor Westbrook yesterday. My heart sank, familiar disappointment rising even amid the celebration. What did she say? She expressed concern about your company's capacity to handle a project of this magnitude, Valerie replied, and suggested I might consider a more established firm with appropriate experience. The pattern was so familiar I could have scripted Eleanor's exact words. The careful undermining disguised as practical concern, the subtle emphasis on limitations rather than potential. And your response? I asked, preparing myself for yet another opportunity diminished by Westbrook interference. Valerie's laugh surprised me. I told her that I make business decisions based on capability and vision, not family politics, and that her obvious attempt to undermine a talented woman suggested insecurity rather than genuine concern. The blunt dismissal of Eleanor's intervention represented a perspective I had rarely encountered in the carefully managed social and business circles of the Westbrook world, one where merit outweighed connection, where established hierarchies could be questioned rather than automatically respected. She didn't take that well, I imagine, I said, unable to suppress a smile at the thought of Eleanor confronted by someone immune to her influence. She suggested I might find Westbrook-controlled properties suddenly unavailable for future developments, Valerie confirmed. I reminded her that diversified partnerships are essential in sustainable business models. No single entity, however established, should control access to opportunity. The philosophy resonated deeply with my emerging understanding of professional autonomy. For 14 years, I had operated within a framework that positioned Westbrook connections as essential to success rather than as one potential pathway among many. Valerie's casual rejection of that premise reinforced my growing recognition that alternative models existed, ones built on mutual value rather than hierarchical access. As I shared the news with my team, our first major commercial contract secured implementation beginning immediately. I felt a clarity of purpose that transcended the specific project. Luminous Living was evolving into the company I had always envisioned, but had been subtly discouraged from creating, one that transformed spaces according to sustainable principles while providing meaningful creative opportunities for talented designers. That evening, celebrating with James over dinner, I found myself observing him with fresh perspective. The past months had challenged fundamental assumptions in our marriage, forcing both of us to reconsider patterns we had long accepted as inevitable. To your success, he said, raising his glass in a toast that felt genuine rather than obligatory. The Ecosphere project is a significant achievement. To new beginnings, I amended, clinking my glass against his. Professional and personal. James nodded, understanding the distinction. Mother called, he admitted. She was displeased with the outcome of your negotiation. I imagined she would be, I replied, unsurprised. Accepting limitations on her influence doesn't align with her self-image. No, James agreed with a wry smile. It doesn't. But she's adapting to the new reality with characteristic strategic thinking. She's already positioning your success as evidence of her mentorship, claiming she always saw your potential and merely wanted to ensure you developed the necessary foundation before taking on significant projects. The revision was so perfectly Eleanor, reframing opposition as support, control as guidance, that I laughed despite myself. Of course she is. The Westbrook narrative must remain consistent, even when the facts suggest otherwise. It's how she's survived as a woman in predominantly male business circles for decades, James observed thoughtfully. Controlling the narrative became her primary form of power. I'm not excusing what she did, just understanding it better now that I've stepped back from her influence. The insight revealed James's own evolution, his growing ability to see his mother not just as the family matriarch, but as a woman who had developed specific strategies to maintain authority in challenging environments. That these strategies had ultimately damaged his marriage reflected not just Eleanor's manipulation, but the limited models of power and success available to her generation. The difference, I noted, is that I don't have to embrace those same strategies. There are other ways to succeed that don't involve controlling others or limiting their potential. Like the approach you're taking with your design team, James observed. I've noticed how you're mentoring the new designers, encouraging their creativity within the project parameters, rather than prescribing exact solutions. The observation was perceptive, evidence that James was seeing me with clearer eyes, recognizing leadership qualities that had always been present, but previously overshadowed by Westbrook expectations. Different generations, different challenges, I acknowledged. Eleanor fought for influence in a system that resisted her presence. I'm fortunate to have more options, more models of success to draw from. As we continued our celebration, discussing the practical implications of Luminous Living's expansion and the adjustments our marriage would require, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had unfolded from Eleanor's unexpected medical episode 3 months earlier. What had begun as a reluctant accommodation, offering our guest room just until you're better, had catalyzed a fundamental recalibration of power, purpose, and possibility. The mysterious locked suitcase, with its damning documentation of systematic interference, had ultimately provided something far more valuable than evidence of past manipulation. It had offered a catalyst for transformation, the painful but necessary awakening to patterns I had unconsciously accepted, boundaries I had internalized as inevitable, and potential I had allowed to be redirected rather than fully expressed. As I raised my glass in a final toast, I silently acknowledged the paradoxical gift Eleanor's unwelcome extended stay had provided. In attempting to maintain control, she had inadvertently created the circumstances for its permanent disruption. In protecting the Westbrook vision of appropriate ambition, she had triggered the full expression of ambition she had long sought to contain. To the unexpected, I said, meeting James's eyes across the table. And to becoming who we're meant to be, not who others expect us to be. To the unexpected, he echoed, his expression suggesting he understood the deeper meaning behind my words. And to the journey ahead, wherever it leads us. The future remained unwritten, our marriage, transformed but still evolving, my company poised for growth that would bring new challenges alongside new opportunities. But unlike the carefully managed path I had unconsciously followed for 14 years, this new direction emerged from genuine choice rather than external prescription, from the liberation that comes when invisible constraints are finally recognized, challenged, and ultimately transcended. Eleanor's suitcase had indeed changed everything, not through the documents it contained, but through the awakening those revelations had triggered. The true transformation wasn't in securing a specific contract or establishing new boundaries with my mother-in-law, but in reclaiming the authority to define success on my own terms and pursue it without apology or accommodation. 3 months after reluctantly offering our guest room, just until you're better, I had discovered something Eleanor never intended to reveal: that the most powerful constraints are those we accept without questioning, and that true liberation begins not with external permission, but with internal recognition of our right to determine our own path forward. 6 months after Eleanor's departure, Luminous Living occupied new headquarters in the downtown design district, a renovated industrial space with exposed brick walls, abundant natural light, and a demonstration area showcasing sustainable materials and innovative design solutions. What had once been a 3-person residential design firm had evolved into a 15-person operation with dedicated teams for commercial and residential projects, each guided by the core philosophy of sustainability without compromise. The Ecosphere. Harbor District project had become our signature achievement, garnering industry recognition and establishing Luminous Living as a serious contender in commercial design. Each of the 6 buildings presented unique challenges, from the Renewable Energy Innovation Center with its specialized laboratory spaces to the conservation nonprofit's collaborative work environments. Meeting those challenges had required unprecedented creativity from our expanded team, pushing us to develop solutions that would eventually become standard approaches in our portfolio. The client feedback has been exceptional, reported Diane, my lead designer who now headed the commercial division. The renewable energy startups particularly appreciate how the design facilitates both focused research and cross-disciplinary collaboration. Valerie mentioned they're seeing unexpected benefits in talent recruitment, I added, reviewing the quarterly assessment report. Prospective employees are specifically citing the workspace design as a factor in their decision to join companies in the complex. This validation was particularly meaningful, evidence that our design philosophy created tangible value beyond aesthetics, influencing organizational effectiveness and employee satisfaction in measurable ways. It represented exactly the impact I had envisioned when first contemplating commercial expansion years earlier, before Eleanor's strategic redirection had channeled my ambitions toward more limited applications. The growth hadn't been without challenges. Scaling rapidly required significant adjustments to our operational systems, financial management, and leadership structure. Where I had once been involved in every design decision, I now focused primarily on strategic direction and client relationships, trusting my team to execute according to our established principles. This evolution in my role initially created tension with James, who had grown accustomed to a wife whose professional obligations remained predictable and contained. The increased demands on my time, the frequent evening client events, and the occasional weekend work sessions disrupted patterns we had established over 14 years of marriage. "I hardly see you anymore," he remarked one evening when I returned home after a late client dinner. "It feels like I'm married to Luminous Living rather than Olivia." The comment echoed concerns he had expressed during the early weeks of our company's expansion, a period when my focus on establishing new operational frameworks and building client relationships had indeed created imbalance in our personal life. But what had once seemed a legitimate grievance now struck me as inconsistent with our renegotiated understanding. "That's interesting," I replied, setting my portfolio aside and giving him my full attention. "You were frequently absent during evening board functions and weekend strategy retreats throughout our marriage. Did you consider yourself married to Westbrook Enterprises rather than to me during those periods?" James appeared startled by the comparison, then thoughtful. "I suppose I assumed those absences were expected, part of my role." "As my current schedule is part of my role," I pointed out gently. "The difference is that your professional demands were always treated as legitimate priorities, while mine were implicitly positioned as optional pursuits that should accommodate family needs first." He nodded slowly, recognition dawning. "Another echo of the double standard I didn't even realize I was perpetuating. This ability to recognize and acknowledge unconscious bias, rather than defensively rejecting the observation, represented significant growth in our relationship. Over the months since Eleanor's departure, James had consistently demonstrated willingness to examine inherited assumptions about gender, ambition, and partnership that had shaped our marriage in ways neither of us had fully recognized. "It's an adjustment for both of us," I acknowledged. "I'm learning to delegate more effectively so client dinners don't always require my presence. You're adapting to a partnership where professional demands are genuinely equal rather than hierarchically arranged." "Equal but different," James Dabarowis. Agreed, a phrase that had become something of a touchstone in our ongoing conversations about recalibrating our relationship. "Speaking of which, how did the presentation to Meridian Global go today?" The question reflected his genuine interest in my professional endeavors, another evolution from the polite but surface-level inquiries that had characterized much of our marriage. Now, when James asked about Luminous Living's projects, the conversations extended beyond pleasant acknowledgement into substantive discussions of design challenges, client dynamics, and strategic implications. "Better than expected," I replied, my enthusiasm for the potential new client evident. Meridian's sustainability director actually cited our work on the Ecosphere project as the reason they reached out. They're planning to retrofit their regional headquarters to reduce environmental impact while enhancing workspace functionality. "That's significant validation," James observed. "Meridian has a reputation for rigorous vendor assessment." Which is why I was surprised when the sustainability director mentioned it was your recommendation that prompted them to contact us, I added, raising an eyebrow in inquiry. "Something you neglected to mention." James shrugged, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Ethan Morris and I serve on the Downtown Development Committee together. When he mentioned their sustainability initiative, recommending Luminous Living was simply good business sense. Your approach aligns perfectly with their objectives." The recommendation represented more than professional courtesy. James had actively directed a significant business opportunity toward Luminous Living, not as a gesture of charity or guilt-driven compensation, but as recognition of genuine alignment between client needs and our capabilities. It was partnership, in its truest form, supporting mutual success rather than maintaining hierarchical positioning. This shift in our relationship dynamic extended beyond professional matters into the fabric of our daily interactions. Where Eleanor's influence had once created subtle but persistent friction, particularly around social obligations and family expectations, we now negotiated these aspects of our life together with greater awareness of underlying assumptions. When the annual Westbrook Foundation Gala approached, an event that had historically placed me firmly in the role of supportive wife rather than equal partner, James surprised me by suggesting we reimagine our participation. "Mother's running the event as always," he noted as we discussed the upcoming calendar. "But I've been thinking we might approach it differently this year." "Different how?" I asked, curious about his suggestion given the rigid protocols that typically governed Westbrook formal functions. "The Foundation's environmental initiative needs revitalization," James explained. "The board recognizes the current approach is more performative than substantive. Your expertise in sustainable practices could provide valuable perspective if you were interested in a more active role than simply attending as my guest." The invitation represented a fundamental shift in how James positioned my relationship to Westbrook institutions, not as an adjacent figure defined primarily by matrimonial connection, but as a professional with relevant expertise to contribute on my own terms. "That would certainly change the dynamic," I observed, considering the implications. "Eleanor has chaired the environmental initiative since its inception. She might not welcome suggestions for substantive revision." "Probably not," James agreed, with remarkable candor. But the board chair specifically mentioned your work with the Ecosphere project as the kind of genuine impact they'd like the foundation to support. Mother's approach has focused primarily on traditional conservation, rather than innovative sustainability practices. The opportunity was professionally intriguing, a chance to influence the direction of significant philanthropic resources toward meaningful environmental initiatives. Yet I hesitated, aware that entering Eleanor's carefully guarded domain would inevitably create tension, particularly so soon after our negotiated détente. I'd need to consider carefully what I could realistically contribute, I said finally, and be clear about the parameters of any involvement. Working adjacent to Eleanor would require well-defined boundaries. Of course, James agreed. Consider it on your own timeline. The invitation exists whenever you're ready to engage, if you choose to. The fact that he presented this as a genuine choice rather than an expected obligation represented another subtle but significant evolution in our marriage. Recognition that my involvement with Westbrook institutions should be determined by authentic interest rather than duty-bound compliance. This respect for autonomous decision-making extended to Eleanor as well, albeit in more complex manifestations. Following our confrontation 6 months earlier, my mother-in-law had maintained the agreed-upon boundaries with remarkable discipline, if not enthusiasm. She no longer attempted direct interference with Luminous Living's business relationships, and her public comments about my professional endeavors remained carefully neutral, if not genuinely supportive. More telling was her gradual adaptation to the changed power dynamic in our relationship. Where she had once addressed me with barely concealed condescension, her current approach combined formal courtesy with strategic reassessment, as if recalculating my position in her carefully maintained social hierarchy. This recalibration became evident during an unexpected encounter at the Symphony Guild luncheon, a civic function I attended primarily to maintain relationships with several residential clients. Eleanor, as honorary chair of the Guild, had historically treated these events as opportunities to subtly reinforce my peripheral status in prestigious social circles. Finding myself seated at her table due to a last-minute arrangement change, I prepared for the familiar pattern of polite marginalization. "Olivia," she greeted me with perfect composure. "I understand the Architectural Sustainability Association has nominated the Ecosphere project for their annual Innovation Award. Quite an achievement for Luminous Living." The public acknowledgement of my company's success, delivered in the presence of several influential community members, represented a calculated adjustment to our new reality. Eleanor was too strategic to maintain openly antagonistic positioning when circumstances had clearly shifted. Instead, she was demonstrating her adaptability, aligning herself with success she couldn't prevent rather than continuing opposition that might diminish her own standing. "Thank you, Eleanor," I replied with equal composure. "The nomination reflects the exceptional work of our entire team. Sustainability innovation requires collaborative expertise." "Indeed," she agreed, her smile precise. "The Westbrook Foundation's environmental initiative could benefit from similar innovative thinking. Perhaps you might consider sharing your perspective at our next committee meeting." The invitation, echoing James's earlier suggestion, but coming directly from Eleanor, confirmed my sense that a strategic repositioning was underway. Unable to maintain her former approach of systematic undermining, she was instead attempting to incorporate my success into her sphere of influence, to transform me from external threat to assimilated asset. "I appreciate the invitation," I responded carefully. James mentioned the Foundation's interest in evolving its environmental focus. I'd be happy to review the current initiatives and provide input where appropriate. Eleanor nodded. Satisfaction, briefly visible beneath her composed expression. "Excellent. My assistant will arrange a suitable meeting time." The exchange, observed by the other women at our table, established a public narrative of collegial cooperation rather than familial tension. It was a masterful demonstration of Eleanor's primary skill, controlling perceptions regardless of underlying realities. Yet, unlike previous iterations of this approach, I now recognized the machinery in operation, understanding both its purpose and its limitations. Later that week, Eleanor's assistant delivered a comprehensive briefing package on the Foundation's environmental initiatives, a gesture that simultaneously acknowledged my professional credibility while attempting to define the parameters of my potential involvement. The documentation revealed what I had long suspected. Beneath the Foundation's public commitment to environmental causes lay a predominantly superficial approach, focused on high-visibility projects with limited substantive impact. Rather than immediately responding with critique, I prepared a thoughtful analysis identifying specific opportunities to align the Foundation's resources with more meaningful sustainability practices. The report maintained professional courtesy while establishing clear expertise, positioning me as a knowledgeable contributor rather than a grateful recipient of Eleanor's conditional inclusion. When we finally met to discuss potential revisions to the Foundation's approach, Eleanor arrived with 2 board members in tow, a strategic choice that transformed what might have been a contentious family discussion into a formal professional consultation. "Olivia has prepared quite a comprehensive assessment," she informed her colleagues, deftly positioning herself as the facilitator of my expertise rather than its recipient. Her work with commercial sustainability implementation offers valuable perspective on our current initiatives. The meeting progressed with surprising productivity, my recommendations receiving serious consideration from the board members while Eleanor maintained her role as institutional steward, acknowledging the value of fresh approaches while subtly emphasizing the Foundation's established legacy. As the discussion concluded, Eleanor's parting comment revealed her remarkable capacity for strategic adaptation. "This is precisely the kind of family collaboration the Foundation has always valued," she observed smoothly. "Different generations bringing complementary expertise to our shared mission." The revisionist framing, positioning our forced renegotiation as natural familial evolution, was classic Eleanor, transforming potential embarrassment into narratively satisfying continuity. What struck me, however, was not the predictable recasting of our relationship but my own response to it. Where once such manipulation would have triggered frustration or resignation, I now viewed it with a kind of anthropological interest, observing the mechanics of Eleanor's approach without being captured by its intended effect. I could appreciate the skill involved in her strategic repositioning while maintaining my own clear understanding of the actual dynamics at play. This emotional independence, the ability to engage with Eleanor's carefully constructed reality without being defined by it, represented perhaps the most significant personal growth emerging from the past 6 months. The locked suitcase had revealed not just the mechanisms of external control, but the extent of my internal acceptance of those mechanisms, my unconscious compliance with limitations presented as inevitable. The professional expansion of Luminous, living while gratifying in its own right, ultimately mattered less than this fundamental reclamation of personal agency, the recognition that external definitions of appropriate ambition, success, and partnership need not determine my own understanding of these concepts. This evolution became particularly evident during a conversation with my father, who visited our new office space while in town for a medical conference. A dedicated physician who had built a respected practice in our small hometown, he had always supported my professional aspirations without fully understanding the specific challenges I encountered in the Westbrook environment. "This is quite impressive, Olivia," he remarked, moving through the design studio where teams collaborated on various projects. "Different from what I imagined when you spoke of interior design work. It's evolved significantly over the past 6 months," I acknowledged, watching him examine the material innovation display that showcased our commitment to sustainable resources. "We're focusing on the intersection of environmental responsibility and functional design, creating spaces that reflect values rather than just aesthetic preferences." He nodded thoughtfully, his expression suggesting recognition of something beyond the physical manifestation of my company's growth. You seem different too. More present somehow, like you're fully inhabiting your own life. The observation, delivered with the particular insight of someone who had known me since birth, captured something essential about my transformation, a quality more fundamental than professional success or marital renegotiation. I've discovered some things about myself, I replied carefully. About patterns I had accepted without questioning and limitations I had internalized as inevitable. Ah, he said simply, his experience as a physician evident in his comfort with difficult truths. The most persistent constraints are often the ones we enforce ourselves, believing they're externally imposed requirements. The observation resonated deeply with my evolving understanding of the past 14 years. Eleanor's systematic interference, while real and deliberately constraining, had succeeded largely through my unconscious acceptance of its underlying premises, that my ambitions should naturally be subordinate to Westbrook priorities, that supportive partnership meant accommodating rather than challenging established expectations. It took discovering actual evidence of external manipulation to recognize how much I had limited myself, I admitted. Even without Eleanor's direct interference, I had absorbed certain assumptions about appropriate scale and scope for my work. Self-limitation as adaptation, my father noted. A common response to environments where direct resistance seems futile. We adjust our expectations to match perceived possibilities, often without realizing how much we've accommodated to external parameters. This clinical framing of my experience was oddly comforting, positioning my former compliance not as personal weakness, but as a natural, adaptive response to persistent environmental cues. More importantly, it highlighted the extraordinary nature of breaking free from such deeply ingrained patterns. The question now, I reflected, is how to maintain this clarity moving forward. How to ensure I don't unconsciously slip back into old patterns of accommodation, especially as the immediate catalyst fades into memory. My father considered this thoughtfully. In medicine, we sometimes see patients make dramatic lifestyle changes following health crises, only to gradually revert to previous patterns as the immediate threat recedes. The key to sustainable change is creating new environmental cues and feedback mechanisms that reinforce the desired patterns. His perspective offered practical wisdom for the ongoing work of reconstruction, both personal and professional. The expanded Luminous Living team, the new client relationships, and the renegotiated marriage dynamic all created environmental reinforcement for my reclaimed agency. Each successful project, each productive boundary maintained with Eleanor, each genuine partnership interaction with James further solidified the new patterns emerging from crisis-triggered awareness. This framework helped me understand why the foundation involvement James and Eleanor had separately suggested carried both opportunity and risk. Entering Eleanor's long-established domain without careful consideration could potentially reactivate old patterns of deference and accommodation, particularly given her remarkable skill at narrative manipulation. I'm considering taking a more active role with the Westbrook Foundation, I shared with my father as we concluded our tour, specifically helping reshape their environmental initiatives toward more substantive impact. An interesting choice, he observed, engaging directly with the institutional structure that previously constrained you. With clearer boundaries and explicit recognition of my expertise, I clarified. The question is whether that's constructive re-engagement or unnecessary re-exposure to potentially toxic dynamics. My father smiled slightly. The difference likely lies in your internal positioning rather than the external circumstances. Are you entering as Olivia Parker, sustainability design expert, or as James Westbrook's wife, fulfilling expected family obligations? The distinction crystallized my ongoing consideration perfectly. My reluctance wasn't about working adjacent to Eleanor or engaging with Westbrook institutions, but about maintaining the hard-won clarity of my professional identity, independent of familial connection. I need to engage on my own terms or not at all, I concluded. Precisely. My father agreed. The reconstruction you've undertaken isn't just about external boundaries with Eleanor or renegotiated expectations with James. It's about maintaining internal clarity about who you are and what you value, regardless of context. This conversation informed my eventual decision regarding foundation involvement, accepting a role as an independent consultant to their environmental initiative, rather than as a family member serving on the committee. The distinction was both practically and symbolically significant, establishing professional parameters rather than familial obligation as the basis for my contribution. Eleanor, with characteristic strategic flexibility, adapted to this arrangement, with public grace. Luminous Living's specialized expertise provides valuable external perspective, she explained to the board, recasting my independence as an asset rather than a rejection of family integration. James, observing this exchange during the board meeting where my consultancy was formalized, caught my eye with a subtle smile that acknowledged both his mother's remarkable adaptability and our shared recognition of its mechanics. This silent communication represented another aspect of our reconstructed relationship, the ability to see Eleanor's manipulations with clear-eyed awareness rather than unconscious acceptance. As the meeting concluded, James and I walked together toward the parking garage, discussing the substantive recommendations I had presented for evolving the Foundation's environmental focus. The board was genuinely impressed with your analysis, he noted, particularly the framework for measuring actual impact rather than just activity metrics. It's a perspective that comes from implementation experience, I replied. Understanding the difference between environmentally conscious aesthetics and genuinely sustainable practices. James nodded thoughtfully. Something Mother never quite grasped despite her years chairing the initiative. Her approach has always prioritized visibility over substantive change, the appearance of environmental commitment rather than measurable impact. The observation revealed his own evolving perspective, the ability to assess his mother's leadership, objectively rather than accepting its inherent correctness. This represented perhaps the most profound aspect of our shared reconstruction, the capacity to honor Eleanor's genuine accomplishments while recognizing the limitations of her approach to both institutional leadership and familial dynamics. She built the foundation into a significant community institution, I acknowledged, creating structures and relationships that have genuine value. The evolution toward more substantive environmental impact builds on that foundation rather than dismantling it. This balanced assessment, recognizing Eleanor's legitimate achievements while maintaining clear-eyed awareness of her manipulative tactics, reflected my own growth beyond either resentful opposition or unconscious accommodation. I could engage with the reality of who she was and what she had built without being defined by her perception or captured by her narrative framing. As James and I reached our respective cars, he paused, his expression reflecting thoughtful consideration. "These past 6 months have transformed more than just your business," he observed. "They've fundamentally changed how we relate to each other and to my family's expectations. I'm still processing what that means for us moving forward." "As am I acknowledged. The reconstruction isn't complete. It's an ongoing process of recognizing patterns, establishing boundaries, and building something new on a more authentic foundation." He nodded, understanding the depth behind my response. "Equal but different," he echoed our evolving framework for partnership. Each pursuing meaningful work while supporting the other's growth rather than containing it. "Exactly," I agreed, appreciating his precise articulation of our emerging dynamic. "The question isn't whether my ambition threatens your position, or whether your family legacy limits my potential. It's how each can enhance the other when neither is artificially constrained." As we parted, James to a board meeting, myself to a client presentation, I reflected on the extraordinary journey catalyzed by Eleanor's unexpected 3-month stay and the mysterious locked suitcase that had ultimately contained the key to my own liberation. The documents revealing 14 years of systematic interference had initially seemed devastating, evidence of betrayal and manipulation that threatened the very foundation of my marriage. Yet, they had ultimately provided something far more valuable than ammunition for conflict or justification for resentment. They had offered the catalyst for transformation, the necessary disruption of unconscious patterns that had limited not just my professional potential, but my fundamental sense of agency. The reconstruction that followed, of my business, my marriage, and my understanding of family dynamics, represented not just recovery from betrayal, but evolution toward something more authentic than what had existed before. The expanded Luminous Living, with its growing team and meaningful client impact, emerged not as compensation for past limitations, but as the natural expression of previously constrained potential. Similarly, the reconstructed marriage with James reflected not just adjusted power dynamics, but a more fundamental reevaluation of partnership, moving from hierarchical arrangement toward genuine mutual support. Even the renegotiated relationship with Eleanor, while still complex and requiring vigilant boundary maintenance, had evolved from unconscious accommodation of her manipulations to clear-eyed engagement with both her strengths and limitations. As I prepared for my client presentation, reviewing the innovative sustainability solutions our team had developed, I recognized that the true renovation catalyzed by Eleanor's unwelcome extended stay wasn't found in the expanded office space or growing client portfolio. It resided in the internal reconstruction of my own understanding, of appropriate ambition, of genuine partnership, and of success defined by authentic purpose rather than external validation. The suitcase had indeed changed everything, not through the documents it contained, but through the awakening those revelations had triggered. The mother-in-law who moved in just for the weekend had inadvertently created the conditions for transformation far more profound than either of us could have anticipated when she collapsed at my dinner table 3 months earlier. What began as reluctant accommodation had culminated in unexpected liberation, from unconscious patterns, from artificial limitations, and from the subtle erosion of autonomy through persistent external definition. The reconstruction continued, both personally and professionally, building on the foundation of awareness that Eleanor's suitcase had unintentionally but irrevocably established. 1 year after Eleanor's fateful 3-month stay, Luminous Living celebrated the grand opening of its showcase project, the complete renovation of the Harbor District's central community building into what we called the Sustainability Innovation Center. What had once been an abandoned municipal structure was now a living demonstration of our design philosophy, featuring renewable energy systems, recycled and sustainable materials, and adaptive spaces that could evolve according to community needs. The project represented a meaningful evolution in our company's approach, moving beyond individual client commissions to create a physical embodiment of our core principles accessible to the broader public. The center would serve as an education space, a community resource, and a testing ground for emerging sustainable design practices. "This is remarkable," observed Mayor Richardson during the private tour before the public opening. "The transformation maintains the building's historical character while establishing entirely new functionality." That intersection of preservation and innovation is central to our approach, I explained as we moved through the adaptive meeting spaces designed to accommodate everything from community workshops to professional training sessions. Sustainability isn't just about new materials and technologies. It's about recognizing and extending the value in what already exists. The philosophy applied to more than buildings. Over the past year, I had discovered that the reconstruction of my professional and personal life following Eleanor's unexpected revelations involved similar principles, honoring valuable elements of existing structures while strategically renovating aspects that no longer served their intended purpose. My marriage to James had undergone precisely this kind of thoughtful renovation. Rather than demolishing the relationship entirely and starting from scratch, a tempting but ultimately reductive response to discovering years of manipulation, we had carefully evaluated which elements remained structurally sound and which required fundamental redesign. The process hadn't been simple or linear. For several months following Eleanor's departure, our interactions had alternated between promising reconstruction and challenging reassessment. James's willingness to acknowledge his role in containing my professional ambitions didn't automatically translate into consistent support for their unfettered expression. The turning point came during a particularly difficult period when the demands of the expanding business created unprecedented strain on our personal time. A major project deadline coincided with the annual Westbrook family retreat, a long-established tradition that Eleanor orchestrated with meticulous attention to familial obligation. "I understand the project is important," James had said when I explained that meeting the deadline would prevent my attendance at the retreat. "But the family gathering has been scheduled for months. Everyone will be expecting you." "Everyone meaning your mother," I clarified, recognizing the familiar pattern of Westbrook expectations presented as universal constants. "Among others," James admitted, "your absence will be noticed and interpreted as a statement about priorities." "It is a statement about priorities," I replied with newfound directness. "My professional commitments matter. Sometimes they take precedence over family social obligations, just as your business responsibilities have frequently taken priority over events important to me." James had started to respond with what I recognized as an Eleanor-influenced rationalization about Westbrook business requirements versus optional design work, then stopped himself, recognition dawning in his expression. "I'm doing it again," he acknowledged, the self-awareness genuine rather than performative. "Perpetuating the double standard where my professional obligations are presented as necessary while yours are positioned as discretionary." The acknowledgement represented significant growth, not just intellectual recognition of inequity, but emotional acceptance of its impact. More importantly, it catalyzed a practical resolution that honored both our needs. "I'll attend the first 2 days of the retreat," James proposed, "fulfilling the essential family obligations while explaining that your critical project deadline prevents your attendance. Then I'll return early to support you through the final presentation preparations." The solution reflected genuine partnership, each of us accommodating the other's priorities without resentment or hierarchical positioning. It established through action rather than theory that our professional commitments carried equal weight, deserving equal accommodation and respect. This recalibrated approach extended to our engagement with the broader Westbrook family ecosystem. James no longer positioned me as an adjunct presence at business functions, but as a professional peer with distinct expertise and legitimate demands on my time and attention. When I did attend Westbrook gatherings, I participated as Olivia Parker, founder of Luminous Living, rather than simply as James's wife, a subtle but significant distinction in how I positioned myself and how others engaged with me. Eleanor, with characteristic strategic adaptation, adjusted her approach accordingly. Unable to maintain her former pattern of subtle undermining without risking further exposure, she instead embraced a carefully crafted narrative of intergenerational professional collaboration. Olivia's innovative approach to sustainability complements the Westbrook commitment to lasting value, she would remark at social functions, effectively incorporating my independent success into the family narrative rather than positioning it as deviation from established expectations. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.